talking baseball. Klazuski, Campanella talking baseball. The Man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber and the Nuke. They knew 'em all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey and the Duke.
All right, Jerry, let's take this trip down memory lane here a little bit. When you got the call to play for this baseball team, if you had known at that point that it was an all-black team in an all-black league, would you have agreed to play?
No.
Would not have gone?
No.
What kind of a reaction were you expecting when you found out?
When I got there and found out it was all black folks, I was stunned, and I thought I was at the wrong ballpark. So I went to 2 more ballparks, and I thought, these black guys are playing before the white team does. And then this gentleman comes up dressed in a snap brim hat, coat and tie, and he says, "Mr. Kraft, I'm Mr. Sedbury." And I said, "The hell you are." And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Didn't know I was black, did you?" And I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Does it make a difference?" And I said, "Probably does." And he said, "Have you ever played for a black ball club?" And I said, "I never saw a black ball club." And he said, "Well, we scouted you in the Oil Ball League, and you're just a pitcher we want." And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Well, Mr. Kraft, our friends in Jacksboro, our black friends, tell us you're not prejudiced, are you?" And I said, "Well, of course not." And so he already had me. He had the race car, and he said, "That's good. Come
Were you,
up."
though, a little bit at that time?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
You know,
Because it's 1959 Texas.
It was 1959. And so he said, "Hey, look, if you don't like us, don't ever come back, but give us this one shot." And I said, "Okay, I'll try." So that's how it started.
Clarence, did you know that Jerry was coming in to pitch for your baseball team?
No.
And what was your reaction when you saw him?
When I seen Jerry, his junior told me that, he have a pitcher. So when Jerry walked in, it was fine with me because we needed a pitcher.
Do you guys think that young people today realize how much different it was and what a big step this was in 1959 Texas?
Of course not. But I can well remember when I stepped onto the field and the crowd was been drinking a good bit, as they always did, and it got deathly quiet. And I can remember Clarence, they were introducing me to everybody, and he was talking to Bobby Heron, who had played with Satchel Paige and was quite a bit older than us. I guess he was 15 years older than us, Clarence, and didn't like me at all, never did. But then I don't think Bobby liked much of anybody, do. But anyway, he said, "Who the hell is that white boy, Clarence?" And Clarence said, "I'm going to bet that's our new pitcher." And he said, "You mean we're going to have to play with that white boy?" And he said, I can remember him laughing and said, "No, he's going to have to play with us, Bobby."
What was your baseball background? Did you play a lot of sandlot baseball as a kid?
Well, yeah, I played sandlot ball before I came to Graham. You know, we just played in pastures.
No fences.
You know, just make your baseball diamond up, place players out, and then we would play.
Jerry, you don't see this much anymore. One of the things that really touched me about your book was it sounded like you were describing my childhood, where we would just get as many guys together as we could and play baseball. I think it's one of the reasons we don't see a lot of black athletes in Major League Baseball today. Because, I mean, you can go out there and play with a hoop and a basketball and get a game up. A little harder to get a baseball team together to play sandlot ball nowadays, don't you think?
I do, and I noticed a real lacking of black ball players in college. I'm not sure why.
Well, again, I think in part it goes back to that opportunity and the difficulty of getting a bunch of guys together for something like that.
Perhaps so.
When you looked at these players, and you had been playing in college some and had some success, what did you think of the caliber of players that you were now going to be playing with?
Oh, I thought it was abysmal to start with. Every one of them had on a different uniform, and they were all ragged and patched, and we didn't have any matching uniforms except Bobby Heron, who'd played with Satchel Paige, and he had that beautiful Monarch uniform on that, and I was in awe of that. But these guys just looked ragged, quite frankly. And then when we got to playing, when they were all there, I'd never seen a better ball club. Just multi-talented guys. And what impressed me the most, they had fun. I never had that much fun playing baseball. You know, we just want to win, and we were disciplined. It was fun playing ball.
You know, I don't know if they were the best players that you ever played with, but they certainly had the best nicknames for a group of guys, didn't they?
Well, everybody had a nickname back in those days.
What was your nickname? Do you have one?
Our white boy. And it wasn't complimentary to start with.
You know, you realize if you reverse that and refer to Clarence with that term, all hell would break loose.
Well, certainly.
Did it ever become an issue when they started referring to you as our white boy?
Again, it was derogatory to start with. And after we had won the game against Grandview, Oklahoma, which is the best team we played, Wayne Fisher, our first baseman, who had a lot of kinfolks there in Grandview, he was so proud of me. He put his arm around me, and he introduced me as our white boy. So I became, instead of white boy, I became our white boy. So that I was finally in then.
Clarence, what was your nickname?
Rabbit.
Rabbit? You were talking about how much fun the games were, and the fans in the stands were drinking, and the tailgate parties afterwards. We've kind of lost that aspect of baseball in America today now, haven't we?
We have, and further, back in my day, everybody had a town team. It doesn't matter how small your town was. Everybody had now some of them weren't very good, but it was a thing to do on Saturday and Sunday, was to go watch the town team and had to have a picnic and so forth. Televised baseball ruined that, and we saw that even with our team. People stopped coming to the ball games. They'd rather stay at home and watch it on TV.
Why is it that baseball and all sports, I think, tend to level an unlevel playing field that we can't seem to accomplish in society? What is it about sports that does that?
I have no idea. Ask me another question.
Well, I think my question would be just that. You mentioned that you were maybe prejudiced when you were a young man. Did that not change the way you view Black Americans and society in general from that experience?
From playing on a black baseball team? Absolutely. Affected me the rest of my life. In fact, my dad said I was a leading liberal in Jacksonville.
Well, it's a small field, though, isn't it?
Well, it was.
But Clarence, how about you? Did it change the way you looked at white Americans from your experience of playing with Jerry?
Well, really it didn't. When I played with Jerry, and we all mingled together, I think we all kind of came together, you know, by having one white boy on our team. You know, we started feeling that we can, you know, have a life and we can still work together. You know, I mean, I know how Jerry felt when we went to one game. This culture over here didn't want to feed Jerry, so that means that we walked away.
Down in the West, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Barbecue, I think a barbecue joint down in West Texas, outside Waco.
West Texas,
All black
yeah.
restaurant.
How did you feel about being thrown out of that place because you're the white guy in the restaurant?
I was stunned.
Yeah.
And when they threw us out and locked the door, Bobby Heron, who didn't like me again, first time I ever saw him smile, he put his arm around me and he said, "Welcome to our world, white boy." And he really enjoyed that. Our road trips were quite interesting. Carl Sadberry would lead us out in the car You'd usually have a car.
Yeah.
I'd have a car. Fat would have a car, but he wouldn't let us ride with him because he always had a girlfriend. He was married, but he'd show up with a different girl every ball game. And I'd say, is this your wife, Pat? No, it's not my wife. And he wouldn't let us ride with him.
Were you surprised at how the fans and the teammates did accept you? It was a relatively quick transition to acceptance, wasn't it?
I was stunned the first game when I took the mound and they started throwing beer bottles at me. And, I thought, well, I'm going home. And the infielders all came and picked up the beer bottles and said, oh, they do this to every pitcher. Don't worry about it. It's not because you're white. There was the fans, and they bet a lot. I mean, they bet on every game, and I would ask, how do you collect the money? He said, we give it to an old guy, and we watch him really close in the 8th and 9th inning. But they'd bet on anything, Clarence.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys ever bet on the games? That seems to be a thing going on in a lot of colleges right now, that kids are starting to bet on the games.
Didn't have any money to bet on, did we, Clarence?
Right. We didn't have the money to bet.
If we had, it'd probably been fun.
But when you look, though, at how you were ultimately treated by the black fan, and then you had one of your players, might have been Bobby, one of your players went and played for an all-white team in East Texas, and he was treated brutally by the white fans. Did that show you where the real problem lies in America?
When we would play, and we played a lot of white ball clubs, Hispanic clubs, never played a mixture. Even the Army was segregated. Fort Walters, we would play the black team or white team, and they were segregated team-wise. One thing that I really liked about the black crowds is that it didn't matter if the other team was winning or not. If there was a really good, if you were the opposite team and you made a really good play, they appreciated it. They'd get up and stand and give you applause, But it was as much a social game as it was a baseball game because, for instance, Fat was our mouther, and he would insult the other team. He would call the black players just the worst names you could ever imagine, and each bench tried that. And when somebody would make a really good insulting remark, the other team would stand up and clap. Actually, it was just a.
If it was good.
It had to be good, and it usually was.
Clarence, did you, deep down though, did you not find a certain amount of enjoyment of beating an all-white team?
Well, no, because I was afraid.
You were afraid?
Yeah, I played, and all-white team, we'd go in there, I'd be scared. Otherwise, we was playing.
Yes,
I'd be afraid.
There was no trash talking when we played an all-white team, particularly the one at Bowie, Texas. I mean, they kept their mouths shut then.
So how much did this change you as you look back now? And you mentioned before your dad considered you the liberal of Jacksboro. How much of a real impact do you think that simple summer of baseball changed the rest of your life?
Well, for instance, when I was in politics, and I was state Democratic committee man, and my business partner and best friend was state Senator Tom Creighton out of Mineral Wells. And we had the southern part of Fort Worth was our district. Tom would not see any black people or Union people, and I did. And when we had our first meeting, we had it at the Petroleum Club. It was at another location. And we had a large number of the black constituents, and they wanted to know why I was doing up there and so forth. And somebody said, who is this guy? And so another one said, well, he ain't the janitor. And So they were getting pretty rough with me. And I said, let me tell you a story about baseball. And I told them this is my story about baseball. And I told them how we could work together. And I said, and if you don't work with me, you're not going to get a damn thing. So, you know, we can work together. And we did. We got along real well after that. Although even then, in the state conventions and so forth, the blacks sat by themselves and the whites sat by themselves.
Jerry, you seem to have, from reading your book, a great deal of respect for that snappily dressed manager, Carl Sedberry. What was your fascination with him? What is it you liked about him?
Carl wasn't a player. In fact, he was a lousy player. He hardly ever played.
Well.
And he turned himself as a manager. He really didn't understand that wasn't that good in the game. He was wonderful about lining up other ball clubs for us to play. I liked his frankness. He would talk to me about the difference between black people and white people, as we were discussing about the toothless Tommy Jones from Breckenridge, the backup catcher that he couldn't catch me. And I said, you know, why are we doing this, Mr. Sedberry? When he introduced himself as he said, you're Mr. Kraft. So he always called me Mr. Kraft. I always called him Mr. Sedberry. But he would give me lessons about, he said, he put his arm around me and said, Mr. Kraft, do white boys like to play catcher? And I said, well, no, not particularly. Why? And I said, well, because it's a dirty, dangerous old job. Do you think black men like it any better? I said, well, I hadn't thought about that, Mr. Sedberry. He would give lessons like that.
It was in that same passage in your book, though. This really jumped off the page at me. Mr. Sedberry was talking to you about why black players couldn't be pitchers because they didn't have the discipline to be a pitcher. That sounds an awful lot, though, doesn't it? Like the white coaches who used to say that black kids can't play quarterback or can't play point guard.
Right.
Did you see the contradiction of him saying that the black players didn't have the discipline to be a pitcher? Because I think they've proven they can.
They can now.
Yeah.
Back in those days, I would say he was probably right.
Really?
There wasn't a lot of discipline. I kept asking him, Carl, why don't we bunt? You know, I mean, we're in a great situation to bunt. Why aren't we bunting? He said, you can't get black people to bunt. Why not? He said, all they want to do is hit a home run.
Well, that's going on today, too, though. Yeah. That's the same thing. But it was more of a let's have fun kind of a game than to do the old nonsense of the bunting and the rest of it that we used to do a lot of back then.
Yeah, and you know, back in those days, it was embarrassing if you couldn't finish a 9-inning game. Now, I understand now in the major leagues, you know, let's get 5 good innings out of this guy and then we'll put our relief pitchers in. It was embarrassing if you couldn't finish back in those days. I see the strategy in it, but so it's quite a different time.
Let me finish it up with this. When you think about what you did and the game that you played in 1959, and all that entailed, where do you think we are now compared to where we were then?
Well, Clarence and I were talking that on the way out. We've never seen people this fast, able to throw the ball at it. We were talking about throwing the ball 100 miles an hour, and I said, mine might have reached 60. Who knows? We didn't have radar guns back then. They're just superior athletes in what we were. But I don't think they had near as much fun as we did. John Prock, when he was interviewing us years ago, was talking to Clarence when we were interviewing there in Jacksboro. And John said, Clarence, don't you realize what a statement you guys were making back in those civil rights days with civil rights and what a impact you were making and the change? And Clarence looked at him kind of strange and said, we were just playing ball. And
did you think at any point? Did you personally think that you were making any kind of a civil rights statement back then?
Not at all. No. I stepped into a world I didn't even know existed, and I enjoyed it very much. 2 great summers of my life.
Was it just a ball game to you too, Clarence?
Well, it's all about the civil rights, movement. And
Were you aware then, greatly aware then of what the 60s was going to bring in the way of civil rights?
no,
You
I
didn't
wasn't
think of those
aware
terms?
then at all.
You could see it starting. It was just starting back
Yeah,
then.
it was tough back then.
I would think it would be incredibly tough back then.
The road trips that we took were quite interesting. Somebody's car always broke down.
Well, wasn't it Clarence that got arrested at that restaurant, right?
At West, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was me.
and that's still an issue today. But a young black man being arrested by white police officers, it's scary today. I'm assuming it had to be incredibly scary in 1959, wasn't it?
Well, yeah.
It was terrifying.
And the only thing about it, I wasn't doing anything. It was one of my ball players pitched the bottle in the car with me. He came and got me.
Yeah, the restaurant owner locked the door and then called the cops because we may be causing trouble. And this big fat white guy came up and said, "What you boys doing?" And we said, "Well, we're going home, I guess. Can't eat here." And he said, pointed at me and said, "What are you doing with these black people?" I said, "I play ball with them." And he said, "Bet your parents are proud of you." And then he looked at Clarence, and Clarence was in his car, and he said, "Been drinking, boy?" And Clarence said, "I don't drink," and he didn't. Still didn't. I don't know, you may by now. Anyway, so
Oh, yeah,
Clarence
I have
said, "I
one
don't
now."
drink," and there was a beer can rolled between his legs, and he said, "Well, there's a beer can. You've been drinking." He said, "I don't drink." It said, "Must have been somebody in the back seat." And he said, "You're under arrest, boy." And so he cuffed Clarence and took him to jail. And we were stunned. And I said, "Okay, well, how much money we got?" So we all pooled all our money and took every penny we got. I think it was about $45, as I recall. Went to the jail, and the guy had his feet propped up on the desk. And, "What do you boys want?" Carl, Mr. Sedbury, and I went in, and we said, "We want to get Clarence out of jail." And he said, "Well, you got any money?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And we put it down there, and he counted it, and he said, "That's not enough." And I said, "Well, they'll have to leave him then, because that's all the money we got." He said, "Well, you sure?" "Yes." "All right, well, we'll let him go." And so he stuck the money in his pocket and went and let Clarence out of the jail, and he said, "You boys better get your butts back home quickly and never show up." And so we did. We got home and we were hungry by the time we did.
I would think just driving some of the back roads of Texas in those days, those segregated days, that had to be a little terrifying to you on more than one occasion, wasn't it?
Not particularly, because we had to drive them to have a restroom. We couldn't use white restrooms. So Carl was in the front of the front car all the time, and anytime somebody needed to use the restroom, which was fairly frequently, as much beer as we drank, he would wave his cap out the window. We preferred to find a bridge so we could go under it, because it wouldn't do for black people to be, out on the side of the road. Or we took a long country lane down there, and that was our restrooms.
You have any questions about the title, Our White Boy?
When they were trying to make a film out of this, Larry McMurtry really didn't like the title, and he wanted to change it, and I insisted on keeping it that way because of why they'd call me that.
What did McMurtry want to call it? Do you remember?
No, I don't. He never did tell me what he wanted.
I think it's an eye grabber myself, and it's a tremendous read, by the way. I read it in one afternoon.
Well,
because
it's kind of short, or you're a fast reader.
No, I'm a relatively fast reader, but as I said to you before on many occasions here, this was much like the life I had in Iowa, playing sandlot baseball, but we didn't have the segregation that you had to deal with in Texas, and thank goodness we didn't. But I just think it's a marvelous story. I think it's a marvelous story, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to meet both of you to talk about it.
Thank you.